It's the early morning of June 12, 1962. The sun hasn't come up yet over San Francisco Bay. Inside Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, a prison guard walks down the cold concrete corridor of B Block. He's doing what he does every morning, the routine head count. Cell by cell, he checks each prisoner. He walks past cell number 138. There's a man lying in the bed facing the wall. The guard moves on. Cell 140. Another inmate also sleeping. Cell 152. Same thing. Everything looks normal. Everything looks quiet. It's just another morning on the rock. But something's wrong. Those men in the beds, they're not sleeping, they're not breathing, they're not even real. They're fake heads made of soap, toilet paper, and real human hair. The prisoners who should be in those cells are gone. They've been gone for hours. Right now, 3 convicted bank robbers are somewhere out in San Francisco Bay. Maybe they're swimming. Maybe they're paddling a homemade raft. Maybe they're already dead in the freezing water. Or maybe, just maybe, they're about to pull off something nobody thought was possible. They're about to escape from Alcatraz, the most secure prison in America. The prison that everyone said couldn't be escaped from. The prison surrounded by ice-cold water and vicious currents. The prison where 36 men had tried to escape before, and every single one of them had either been killed, captured, or drowned. Until now, 3 men have vanished into the night. 3 men who spent 6 months planning, digging, building, and preparing. 3 men who used makeshift tools, stolen raincoats, and fake heads to fool the guards. 3 men named Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin. This is the story of how they did it. This is the story of the only escape from Alcatraz that nobody can definitively say failed. This is the story of what happens when desperation meets intelligence, and when prison walls meet human determination. Chapter 1. The Rock, America's Super Prison. Before we talk about the escape, you need to understand what Alcatraz was. You need to understand why this place was different from every other prison in America. You need to understand why escaping from the rock seemed impossible. Let's start with the basics. Alcatraz Island sits in the middle of San Francisco Bay, about 1¼ miles from the San Francisco shoreline. It's a small island, only 22 acres of solid rock and cliffs. When you stand on the island and look at the city across the water, San Francisco looks close. It looks like you could almost swim there, but that's deceiving. That water is deadly cold. That water has currents that can pull a grown man under in seconds. The island got its name in 1775 when a Spanish explorer named Juan Manuel de Ayala sailed into San Francisco Bay. He saw all the pelicans and seabirds covering the rocky island, so he called it La Isla de los Alcatrazes, Island of the Pelicans. Over time, English speakers shortened it to Alcatraz. For decades, the island was used as a military fort. During the Civil War, it held prisoners. Then it became a military prison. Soldiers who committed crimes got sent there. But in 1933, something changed. The United States was in the middle of the Great Depression. Crime was everywhere. Bank robberies, kidnappings, gangsters with machine guns, organized crime families controlling entire cities. The federal government decided they needed a special prison, a prison for the worst of the worst. A prison for criminals who kept causing trouble in other prisons. A prison so secure, so isolated, so tough, that even thinking about escape would be pointless. So, in 1933, the Department of Justice took over Alcatraz from the military. They spent months renovating it. They installed tool-proof steel bars on every cell. They put metal detectors at the entrance to the dining hall. They built gun towers at strategic points around the island. They installed tear gas, canisters that could be triggered remotely if prisoners rioted. They hired one guard for every 3 prisoners, way more than any other prison. They made Alcatraz into what they called the prison system's prison. The prison officially opened on August 11, 1934. That first day, 137 prisoners arrived from Leavenworth Federal Prison in Kansas. They came by train, then by boat. Every prisoner was handcuffed and shackled. Federal agents with guns surrounded them. These weren't ordinary criminals. These were bank robbers, murderers, counterfeiters, and escape artists. These were men who other prisons couldn't handle. Over the years, some famous criminals ended up on Alcatraz. Al Capone, the notorious gangster from Chicago, served time there. George Machine Gun Kelly, the kidnapper, was locked up on the Rock. Robert Stroud, who people called the Birdman of Alcatraz, spent years in that prison. Though the funny thing is, he never actually had any birds while he was at Alcatraz. That was just Hollywood making up a better story. Life at Alcatraz was harsh. Each prisoner got a cell that measured 9 feet long by 5 feet wide. That's about the size of a small bathroom. Inside each cell was a cot, a small sink, a toilet, and maybe a small shelf. That was it. No television, no radio, no luxuries. The walls were concrete. The bars were steel. The cell door had a locking mechanism that could only be opened from outside. Every morning, guards counted the prisoners. Every afternoon, they counted again. At night, they counted one more time. 12 counts every single day. Prisoners at Alcatraz had exactly 4 rights: food, clothing, shelter, medical care. Everything else was a privilege that had to be earned. Want to work in the prison laundry or the furniture shop? Earn it by following the rules. Want visits from your family? Earn it. Want to use the prison library? Earn it. Want to play music or paint pictures during recreation time? Earn it. The whole system was designed to teach prisoners one thing: how to follow rules and not cause trouble. The daily routine was rigid: wake up at 6:30 in the morning, breakfast at 6:50, head count, work assignments, lunch at 11:30, more work, dinner at 4:25, back to your cell, lights out. Every single day the same schedule, year after year. Some prisoners actually requested transfers to Alcatraz from other federal prisons. Why? Because at Alcatraz, you got your own cell. At other prisons, you had to share a cell with 1 or 2 other criminals. Some guys preferred being alone, even if it meant living in the toughest prison in America. But here's the thing about Alcatraz that really mattered: the water. The prison sat on an island surrounded by San Francisco Bay. The water temperature in June, when our story takes place, is around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. That might not sound terribly cold, but in water that cold, a person can develop hypothermia in less than an hour. Your muscles stop working right. Your thinking gets fuzzy. Your body starts shutting down. Even experienced swimmers struggle in water that cold. And then there are the currents. San Francisco Bay isn't a calm lake. Water rushes in and out through the Golden Gate Strait, the narrow opening that connects the bay to the Pacific Ocean. Every time the tide changes, massive amounts of water flow through that gap. The currents near Alcatraz can move at speeds of up to 5 miles per hour. That doesn't sound like much, but when you're in the water trying to swim, it's like swimming against a river. The current pushes you. It pulls you. It can drag you out to sea before you even realize what's happening. Prison officials said Alcatraz was escape-proof. They said the location made it impossible. They said even if someone got out of their cell, even if they got past the guards, even if they made it to the water, they'd never survive the swim. The cold would kill them. The currents would drown them. And, for the most part, they were right. Between 1934 and 1962, 36 prisoners attempted to escape from Alcatraz. 23 got captured before they even left the island. 6 got shot and killed. 2 drowned. 5 went missing and were presumed dead. Not one single person was known to have successfully escaped. Until June 11, 1962. Chapter 2. 3 Criminals and a Plan. Now, let's talk about the men who decided to try the impossible. Frank Lee Morris arrived at Alcatraz on January 18, 1960. He was prisoner number 1441. He was 33 years old. He'd been in and out of prison his whole adult life. But Frank Morris wasn't like most criminals. He was smart, really smart. Prison officials tested his IQ and found it was 133, which put him in the top 2% of the entire population. This wasn't just some common criminal. This was a man who could think, plan, and solve problems. Morris's life had been hard from the start. He was born in Washington, D.C. on September 1st, 1926. His mother died when he was young, and by age 11 he was an orphan. He got shuffled between foster homes, never staying anywhere long enough to feel settled. By age 13, he was convicted of his first crime. From there, it was a long slide downward. Narcotics possession, burglary, armed robbery, more burglary. By his late teens and early 20s, Morris had built up an impressive criminal record. But Morris was also building up another kind of record, an escape record. He'd escaped from prison before. Not just once, but multiple times. In 1960, while serving time at Louisiana State Penitentiary for bank robbery, Morris escaped. He made it out, stayed free for a while, then got caught again during a burglary. That's when federal officials decided enough was enough. This guy kept escaping. He needed to go somewhere he couldn't escape from. They sent him to Alcatraz. Morris was smart, quiet, and observant. Other prisoners said he didn't talk much. He watched, he studied. He learned how the prison worked, where the guards went, when they made their rounds, what the routines were. Morris wasn't just serving time, he was gathering information. Later, in 1960, another prisoner arrived at Alcatraz. His name was John William Anglin, prisoner number 1476. John was 30 years old when he got to the Rock. He came from a big family, 13 brothers and sisters total, growing up poor in Donaldsonville, Georgia. His family worked as farmers and seasonal crop pickers. Life was hard. Money was always tight. John and his brothers started committing crimes when they were young. Not violent crimes. They robbed banks and stores, but they did it when the places were closed. No one got hurt, no witnesses. They were smart about it, in their own way, but smart doesn't mean you won't get caught. On January 17, 1958, John Anglin and his brothers Clarence and Alfred robbed the Bank of Columbia in Columbia, Alabama. They got away with about $19,000. The FBI caught them. All 3 brothers got sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. They started out at Florida State Prison, then got moved to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Kansas, and then to Atlanta Federal Penitentiary in Georgia. But the Anglin brothers didn't like being locked up. They tried to escape from Atlanta. John came up with a plan to hide inside a bread delivery box and get smuggled out. A guard discovered them before it worked. After that escape attempt, prison officials decided John Anglin needed to go to Alcatraz. He arrived in October 1960. A few months later, in January 1961, John's brother Clarence arrived at Alcatraz too. He was prisoner number 1485. Clarence was 30 years old, 1 year younger than John. He was serving the same 35-year sentence for the same bank robbery. The brothers got assigned to cells right next to each other in B Block. Now, here's the important part. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers already knew each other. They'd all been in federal prisons before, at Leavenworth and Atlanta. They weren't strangers. They'd probably talked in prison yards, past each other in hallways, maybe even worked together in prison workshops. When they all ended up at Alcatraz, they recognized each other. There was also a fourth man involved in the escape plan. His name was Alan Clayton West, prisoner number 1335. West was in his early 30s. He'd been convicted of car theft and sent to Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, then transferred to Florida State Prison. Like the Anglin brothers, West kept trying to escape from prison. That's why he got sent to Alcatraz in 1957. West was different from Morris and the Anglins. Other prisoners didn't like him much. Some described him as arrogant and a talker, someone who talked big but didn't always deliver. West also played the accordion. His cell was right next to Morris's cell. According to some accounts, West and Morris didn't get along at first. West liked to talk and play music. Morris liked quiet. But eventually, they started talking. And talking led to planning. If you're watching right now and you're interested in more stories from American history like this one, hitting that subscribe button helps us create even more content. We've got plenty more fascinating stories to tell, and your support makes it all possible. Nobody knows exactly when the four men started planning their escape. The best evidence suggests it began in December 1961. West claimed he found some old saw blades while working in a utility corridor. Whether that's true or not, we don't know for sure. West liked to claim he masterminded the whole plan. Other people think Frank Morris was really the brains behind it. Either way, by December 1961, all four men were working together. The plan was complicated, really complicated. It required months of work. It required stealing materials without getting caught. It required making tools out of things that weren't supposed to be tools. It required patience and secrecy and perfect timing. Here's what they needed to do. First, they had to get out of their cells. The cells had ventilation grates on the back walls, metal grills covering holes that led to a utility corridor behind the cells. Those grills were bolted into the concrete. The men needed to remove the grills without the guards noticing. They couldn't just rip the grills off. That would make noise. That would leave obvious damage. Instead, they needed to drill holes in the concrete around each grill, hundreds of tiny holes close together, until they could remove an entire section of the wall. Then, they needed to make fake grills to cover the holes during the day, so guards wouldn't see anything wrong during inspections. Second, once they got into the utility corridor behind the cells, they needed to climb up to the roof of the cell block. The utility corridor had pipes running up the walls, plumbing pipes about 3 stories tall. They'd have to climb those pipes in the dark, carrying their equipment without making noise that would alert the guards. Third, they needed to get onto the prison roof. On top of the cell block building, there was a large ventilation shaft with a grate covering it. They'd have to remove that grate, climb through, and get onto the roof. Fourth, they had to get off the roof and down to ground level. The prison was built on top of a hill, so the roof was about 50 feet above the ground at the back of the building. They'd have to climb down somehow, probably using pipes attached to the exterior wall. Fifth, they had to get past the prison fence. The perimeter of the prison had 2 12-foot-high barbed wire fences. They'd have to climb over those without tearing themselves apart on the sharp wire. Sixth, they had to get off the island. This meant going into the water, in the cold, in the dark, with strong currents. This was the most dangerous part. This was the part that had killed other escape attempts before. To survive the water, they needed a raft and life vests. They couldn't buy these things. They couldn't order them from outside. They had to make them from materials inside the prison. Morris came up with the idea to use raincoats. The prison had a workshop where inmates manufactured raincoats. Over several months, the 4 men stole more than 50 raincoats. some donated by other inmates, some stolen from the workshop. They smuggled these raincoats back to their cells, then took them up into their secret workshop in the utility corridor. Using contact cement stolen from the prison workshop, they glued the raincoats together to make a raft and life vests. They also made wooden paddles to help them navigate in the water. But here's the problem. All of this work, drilling holes, climbing into the utility corridor, building the raft, making tools, had to happen at night. After lights out, when guards were making their rounds, if a guard looked into a cell and didn't see a prisoner, the whole plan would collapse. Alarms would sound. The escape would fail. So they came up with another solution. They made fake heads. They used toilet paper, soap, and concrete powder to create papier-mâché heads that looked like human heads. They painted them with flesh-colored paint stolen from the workshop. They glued real human hair onto the heads, hair they'd collected from the prison barbershop over many weeks. When they placed these heads on their pillows at night, from a distance, in dim lighting, they looked like sleeping prisoners. Think about how much planning this took. Think about how many things had to go right. They needed saw blades to cut through metal. They needed spoons sharpened into chisels to chip away concrete. They needed a homemade drill made from a vacuum cleaner motor to drill the holes. They needed glue to stick raincoats together. They needed paint to color the fake heads. They needed hair for the heads. They needed to hide all their work during the day. They needed to do all their work at night without making so much noise that guards heard them. And they needed time. Lots of time. Every night after lights out, they'd work for a few hours, then put the fake heads back in their beds and go to sleep before morning count. Night after night, week after week, month after month. From December 1961, all the way through May and into June of 1962. The noise was a problem. When you're drilling holes in concrete, it makes noise. When you're chipping away at a wall with a makeshift chisel, it makes noise. How did they cover the sound? Frank Morris played the accordion. Every evening, during the time when prisoners were allowed to have personal time in their cells, Morris would play his accordion. The music helped mask the sounds of drilling and chipping coming from the nearby cells. Guards walking past just heard accordion music. They didn't hear the sounds of prison walls being slowly, methodically destroyed. By May 1962, Morris and the Anglin brothers had successfully drilled out their ventilation grates. They'd created the fake grills to hide the holes. They'd set up their workshop in the utility corridor. They'd built the raft and the life vests. They'd made the fake heads. They'd stolen the tools they'd need for the final escape. Everything was almost ready. Alan West was having trouble. His hole wasn't finished. He'd made his hole too big at first, and then he'd tried to patch it with concrete to make it less noticeable. But the concrete he used was too strong. When escape night came, he couldn't get through his own hole fast enough. By early June 1962, the four men knew they were running out of time. Guards periodically did thorough inspections of cells. If they did an inspection and discovered the holes behind the ventilation grates, the whole plan would be exposed. They needed to go soon. They picked June 11, 1962. Chapter 3, Escape Night. June 11th, 1962 was a Monday. Just an ordinary day at Alcatraz. Prisoners woke up at their usual time. They went through their usual routines. Breakfast, work assignments, lunch, more work, dinner, recreation time. Nothing seemed unusual to the guards. Nothing seemed different. But Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin knew. Tonight was the night. After 6 months of planning and working and hiding and building, tonight they were going to try to escape from America's most secure prison. Around 9:30 in the evening, the prison started its nighttime routine. Prisoners returned to their cells. Guards did a count. Cell doors locked. Lights went out at 9:30. The prison got quiet. Most prisoners went to sleep. The guards began their nighttime patrol schedule. In cell 138, Frank Morris waited. In cell 140, John Anglin waited. In cell 152, Clarence Anglin waited. And in cell 140, Alan West tried desperately to get his ventilation grate loose. He'd used too much concrete to patch the hole. Now the concrete had hardened. He couldn't get through. Sometime around 10 p.m., Morris decided they couldn't wait any longer. West wasn't ready. If they waited for West, they might miss their chance. Morris made the difficult decision. They were going without West. Morris, John, and Clarence put their fake heads on their pillows. The heads looked surprisingly real, hair on top, painted features. In the dim light of the cell block at night, they looked like men sleeping, facing the wall. The prisoners quietly removed their ventilation grates. One by one, they crawled through the holes in their cell walls. Behind the cells, they found themselves in the utility corridor. This was an unguarded space, a 3-foot-wide corridor that ran behind the cell block, filled with pipes and wiring. Guards rarely came back here. Prisoners weren't supposed to be here, but Morris and the Anglins were here now, in the dark, carrying their equipment. They climbed up the pipes. 3 stories up in darkness, climbing metal pipes. One wrong move and they could fall. One loud noise and a guard might hear them. But they made it to the top. They reached the ventilation shaft that led to the prison roof. This was a critical moment. The ventilation shaft had a large metal grate covering it. They had to remove this grate to get through. When they finally got it loose and pulled it aside, it made a loud noise, loud enough that 2 guards heard it. The guards stopped. They listened. They discussed whether they should investigate. For a moment, the entire escape hung in the balance. If those guards came to investigate, Morris and the Anglins would be caught. The escape would fail. They'd be punished. They'd probably get sent to solitary confinement. All those months of planning would be for nothing. But the guards decided not to investigate. Maybe they thought the noise was just normal sounds from the old prison building. Maybe they were lazy. Maybe they figured that if something was really wrong, they'd hear more sounds. Whatever their reasoning, they didn't investigate. They went back to their patrol. Morris and the Anglins climbed through the ventilation shaft and onto the roof of the cell block. They were outside now. Cold night air. Darkness. The prison yard spread out below them. Guard towers stood at the corners of the island, their searchlights sweeping back and forth across the grounds. They needed to get to the ground without being seen. On the back side of the cell block building, a large kitchen exhaust pipe ran down the exterior wall. The pipe was about 50 feet tall, roughly as high as a 5-story building, but it provided a way down. One by one, the 3 men climbed down the pipe, hands gripping the metal, feet finding purchase. Slowly, carefully, descending in the darkness. They made it to the ground. Now they were in the prison yard, at the back of the building. Between them and the shore, there were 2 fences, both about 12 feet high, both topped with barbed wire. The searchlights from the guard towers swept across the yard, moving in predictable patterns. The men waited for the right moment. When the searchlight moved away from their area, they ran to the first fence. They climbed it. The barbed wire tore at their clothes, scratched their skin. But they got over. They ran to the second fence. Again, they climbed. Again, the barbed wire cut them. But they made it over. They were on the northeast shore of Alcatraz Island now, at a spot where the searchlights couldn't reach them because of the angle of the rocks and cliffs. They had their raft. They had their life vests. They had their wooden paddles. and they had the cold, dark water of San Francisco Bay in front of them. According to Alan West's later testimony, the plan was to paddle to Angel Island first. Angel Island was another island in San Francisco Bay, about 2 miles north of Alcatraz. It was closer than the mainland, and the currents might help carry them in that direction. Once they reached Angel Island, they'd rest, then swim or paddle across Raccoon Strait to the Marin County mainland. Once on the mainland, they planned to steal clothes and a car, then disappear. The water temperature that night was probably somewhere around 53 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to cause hypothermia, cold enough to make swimming extremely difficult. The tide was going out, which meant the current was flowing toward the Golden Gate in the ocean. If they couldn't control their direction, the current would pull them out to sea. Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin inflated their raft. They put on their life vests, they got into the water, and they started paddling into the darkness. The time was probably around 11 p.m. or midnight. Behind them, back in the cell block, Alan West finally managed to get his ventilation grate loose. He crawled through his cell wall, made his way to the utility corridor, climbed up to the roof, climbed down to the ground. By the time he got to the shore, Morris and the Anglins were long gone. The water was empty. The raft was gone. West had no choice. He climbed back up the pipe, went back through the ventilation shaft, climbed back down into the utility corridor, crawled back through his cell wall, and got into bed. There was nothing else he could do. Out on the water, 3 men paddled their makeshift raft through the cold darkness of San Francisco Bay, and then they vanished. Chapter 4. Discovery and Search. The next morning, June 12, 1962, started like any other morning at Alcatraz. Guards began their morning routine. Wake-up time came. The guards started their count. Around 7:01 or 7:15 a.m., a guard named Bill Long walked down the cell block doing the head count. Cell 138. There's a man in the bed facing the wall. Cell 140. Same thing, cell 152. Another sleeping prisoner. Long marked them present and continued his count. But something must have seemed off. Maybe one of the fake heads looked a little strange in the morning light. Maybe the guard just had a feeling. Whatever the reason, Long came back for a second look. This time, he looked more carefully. He reached through the bars. He touched one of the heads. It fell off the pillow. It was made of soap and toilet paper. It wasn't a real head. It wasn't a real person. The prisoner was gone. Long immediately checked the other cells. More fake heads, more missing prisoners. 3 cells, 3 fake heads, 3 missing inmates. He hit the alarm. The siren started wailing across the entire island. Within minutes, every guard in the prison was mobilized. The warden was notified. The prison went into immediate lockdown. Guards rushed to every cell, every corridor, every workshop, every yard. They searched everywhere. But Morris and the Anglins were nowhere on the island. Guards discovered the holes in the cell walls. They found the utility corridor. They found the climbing route up the pipes. They found the removed ventilation grate on the roof. They found the route down the exterior pipe. They found evidence of the men going over the fences. Everything pointed to the water. The 3 prisoners had escaped from their cells, gotten off the island, and entered San Francisco Bay. But there was a 4th hole. In cell 140, guards found another cell with a removed ventilation grate. Alan West's cell. Guards questioned West. At first, he tried to deny everything. But eventually, he told them the whole story. He explained the plan. He described how they'd built the raft and life vests. He told them the route Morris and the Anglins had planned to take. To Angel Island first, then to Marin County. The FBI was called immediately. The Coast Guard was notified. A massive search began. Coast Guard boats patrolled San Francisco Bay. FBI agents searched Angel Island. Local police searched the Marin County shoreline. Helicopters flew over the water. Search area covered hundreds of square miles. Within a day or two, searchers started finding evidence. A homemade paddle washed up on Angel Island. A second paddle was found nearby. A life vest made of raincoats was discovered on Cronkite Beach, north of San Francisco. A plastic bag containing family photos and addresses was found floating in the bay. Pieces of the raincoat raft were found in the water, but no bodies, no sign of the three men. The FBI interviewed the families of Morris and the Anglins. Agents went to Donaldsonville, Georgia, and talked to the Anglin brothers' mother and siblings. They talked to Morris's known associates. They checked with informants. They investigated every possible lead, but nobody had seen the three escapees. Nobody had heard from them. There were no reported car thefts in Marin County, no burglaries of clothing stores, no sightings of suspicious men matching their descriptions. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The search continued, but nothing new turned up. The FBI developed a theory. Based on the evidence, they concluded that Morris and the Anglins had probably drowned. Here's their reasoning. First, the water was too cold. Even with life vests, swimming in 55-degree water for an extended period would cause hypothermia. Your body temperature drops. Your muscles stop working properly. You lose coordination. Eventually, you lose consciousness. Even strong swimmers can't survive very long in water that cold without proper protection. Second, the currents were too strong. The night of the escape, the tide was going out. Water was flowing from the bay toward the Golden Gate and out to the Pacific Ocean. If the men couldn't paddle strongly enough to fight the current, they would have been pulled out to sea. Once in the ocean, their chances of survival would be essentially zero. Third, no one reported seeing them. If three soaking wet men had made it to shore anywhere in the San Francisco Bay area, someone would have seen them. But there were no reports, no car thefts, no burglaries, no sightings. Fourth, the raft fragments suggested failure. Pieces of the raft washed up in the bay, which suggested it had come apart. If the raft fell apart while the men were still in the water, they would have had to swim. Swimming in those conditions would be nearly impossible. Based on all this evidence, the FBI concluded that Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin had likely drowned attempting to escape from Alcatraz Island. Their bodies, the FBI theorized, had either sunk to the bottom of the bay or been swept out to sea by the current. If they'd been swept out to sea, they'd be impossible to find. The Pacific Ocean is vast. Bodies disappear. In 1979, 17 years after the escape, the FBI officially closed its case. The conclusion: the three men were dead, presumed drowned. The case was closed, but the U.S. Marshals Service kept the case open, and here's why this matters. To this day, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin remain on the U.S. Marshals wanted list. They're still considered fugitives. The Marshals Service has said they'll keep the case open until the escapees would be over 100 years old, which means the case will finally close sometime around 2030. Why would the Marshals keep the case open if they're convinced the men died in 1962? Because they're not completely convinced. Because there's no proof, no bodies, no definitive evidence of death. Just a lot of circumstantial evidence suggesting the men probably died. Probably isn't the same as definitely. Chapter 5. The mystery deepens. Here's where the story gets really interesting. Over the years since the escape, strange things have happened. Odd pieces of evidence have surfaced. People have come forward with stories, and every few years something new appears that makes people wonder. Did those three men actually survive? Let's start with the escape itself. Can it be done? Is it actually possible to escape from Alcatraz and survive the swim? In 2003, the television show Mythbusters decided to test whether the escape was physically possible. They built a raft using the same materials and techniques Morris and the Anglins would have used. They launched it from Alcatraz at the same time of night, during similar tidal conditions. And you know what? They made it. They successfully paddled from Alcatraz to Marin County. The raft worked. The route was possible. They concluded that yes, with the right timing and the right conditions, 3 determined men could have made it. More recently, in November 2025, a YouTuber named Mark Rober, working with journalists Johnny Harris and Cleo Abram, recreated the escape in even more detail. They used the same plans, the same materials, the same handmade tools. They built a raft exactly like the one Morris and the Anglins built. They launched from the same spot on Alcatraz. And they succeeded. They didn't go to Angel Island like the escapees had planned. They ended up near the Golden Gate Bridge because the currents carried them in a different direction. But they survived. They made it to land. This proved that the escape plan wasn't impossible. It was difficult, yes. Dangerous, absolutely, but not impossible. So if the escape could work, why are so many people convinced the men died? Well, because there's no proof they lived. In the days and weeks after the escape, no one saw them. No cars were stolen in Marin County that matched their planned method of getting away. The Anglin family, despite being interviewed multiple times by the FBI, claimed they hadn't heard from John and Clarence. There were no credible sightings, but then, years later, strange things started happening. The Anglin family started receiving mysterious Christmas cards. In 1962, just months after the escape, the family got a Christmas card. It was signed, "To Mother from John, Merry Christmas." No return address. No postmark that could be traced, but the handwriting looked like John's. Another Christmas card came in 1963, another in 1964. Year after year, the Anglin family received these cards. The FBI investigated. They couldn't prove the cards were really from John Anglin, but they couldn't prove they weren't either. The cards kept coming for years. The family also claimed that John and Clarence might have visited. In 1975, the family held a funeral for the brothers' mother. Family members later said they saw 2 men in the cemetery who looked like John and Clarence. The men were standing at a distance watching the funeral. When anyone tried to get closer, the men disappeared. Were these actually John and Clarence? Or was this just wishful thinking from a grieving family? Nobody knows. In 2013, something extraordinary happened. The San Francisco Police Department received a letter. The letter was supposedly written by John Anglin. It said, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely." The letter continued. It said that Frank Morris had died in 2008. It said that Clarence had died in 2011, and it said that John was the only one left. The letter writer offered a deal. He'd turn himself in and spend a year in prison, but only if authorities promised to give him medical treatment for his cancer. If authorities agreed to the deal, he'd tell them where he was. The FBI analyzed the letter. They couldn't verify it was really from John Anglin. The handwriting didn't match old samples they had on file, but the letter writer included details about the escape that weren't widely known. How did the writer know these details? Was it really John Anglin, or was it a hoaxer who'd researched the escape thoroughly? The U.S. Marshals Service investigated. They couldn't confirm the letter was legitimate. They also couldn't confirm it was fake. The case remained open. There's also a photograph. In 2015, the Anglin family showed a photograph to investigators. The photo was taken in 1975, 13 years after the escape. It shows two men standing next to a termite mound in Brazil. Family members insist the two men in the photo are John and Clarence Anglin. They claim John and Clarence fled to Brazil after the escape and lived there for years. A forensic analyst named Art Roderick examined the photograph. Roderick was a retired U.S. Marshal who'd worked on the Alcatraz case for years. He compared the faces in the 1975 photo to known photographs of John and Clarence from before the escape. His conclusion, the facial features matched. The men in the photo could indeed be John and Clarence Anglin, but he couldn't be 100% certain. The photo quality wasn't perfect. The angle wasn't ideal. It was possible, but not proven. The History Channel aired a special in 2015 called Alcatraz, Search for the Truth. They investigated all of this evidence: the Christmas cards, the sightings, the letter, the photograph. They hired forensic experts. They interviewed family members. Their conclusion: it was plausible that the Anglin brothers survived and lived in Brazil for years. Not proven, but plausible. What about Frank Morris? There's almost no evidence suggesting he survived. No mysterious letters, no photographs, no family members claiming to have seen him. If Morris survived the escape, he disappeared completely. He left no trace. No one knows what happened to him. Alan West, the fourth man who failed to escape that night, lived a very different life. West stayed in prison. He eventually got transferred to other federal prisons. He served his full sentence and was released. After getting out of prison, West went back to a life of crime. He committed burglary and got sent back to prison. In the 1970s, while serving time in a Florida prison, West died. But before he died, he was interviewed multiple times about the escape. He told investigators everything he knew about the plan. Without West's testimony, authorities wouldn't have understood how the escape was accomplished. West always maintained that he believed Morris and the Anglins had survived. He said they were smart enough. He said they'd planned well enough. He said the raft would have worked. But West had no proof. He never heard from them after the escape. He just believed they made it. Chapter 6. What Science Says. Over the years, scientists and experts have analyzed the escape from every possible angle. They've studied the tides, they've modeled the currents, they've calculated probabilities. Let's look at what the science actually says about whether three men could survive that swim. The main factors are water temperature and currents. We know that on June 11, 1962, the water temperature in San Francisco Bay was somewhere around 53 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, the average person can survive in the water for 1 to 3 hours before hypothermia becomes life-threatening. But survival time depends on many factors: how much body fat you have, how strong you are, whether you're wearing insulating clothing, whether you keep moving or stay still. Morris and the Anglins were wearing multiple layers of clothing for insulation. They had life vests made of raincoats. This would have helped keep them afloat and would have provided some protection from the cold water. They also would have been paddling and moving, which generates body heat. So they'd have had longer than the average person before hypothermia set in. Maybe 2 to 4 hours instead of 1 to 3. The distance from Alcatraz to the nearest shoreline, Angel Island, is about 2 miles. A strong swimmer in normal conditions can swim 2 miles in roughly an hour. But these weren't normal conditions. The water was cold. The men were paddling a raft, not swimming freestyle. The currents were working against them. In 2014, researchers at Dutch National Police Agency used computer models to study the escape. They input data about the tides on June 11, 1962. They modeled the currents. They calculated different possible routes the men could have taken. Their conclusion: if the men left Alcatraz around 11 p.m. and paddled with even moderate effort, they could have reached land somewhere in Marin County by around 1 or 2 a.m. That's 2 to 3 hours in the water. Long enough to risk hypothermia, but not necessarily fatal. The most likely landing spot, according to the models, was not Angel Island. It was somewhere near Horseshoe Bay in Marin County, north of San Francisco. The outgoing tide would have carried them in that direction. If they paddled north and the current pushed them northwest, they'd end up near Horseshoe Bay. That area has beaches and rocky shoreline where they could have climbed out of the water. Here's the critical point. If they made it to shore, what next? They'd be soaking wet. They'd be cold. They'd probably be experiencing some level of hypothermia. They'd be on the shore in the middle of the night with no dry clothes, no money, no car. They'd plan to steal clothes and a car, but doing that in their condition would be extremely difficult. And here's the problem. There were no reports of stolen cars or stolen clothes in Marin County on the night of June 11th or the morning of June 12th. No reports of suspicious wet men walking around. No burglaries. Nothing. If Morris and the Anglins made it to shore, they left absolutely no trace. They disappeared completely. Is that possible? Can 3 men disappear so completely that not a single witness sees them? It's possible, but unlikely. Think about it. 3 men soaking wet, cold, tired, walking through Marin County looking for a house to break into or a car to steal. And nobody sees them? Nobody reports anything. Suspicious? That seems hard to believe. Unless they had help. This is where some conspiracy theories come in. Some people believe Morris and the Anglins had someone waiting for them on the shore. A friend. An accomplice. Someone with dry clothes and a car. If that's true, it would explain how they disappeared without a trace. They'd get out of the water, get picked up, drive away. No stolen car, no burglary, no witnesses. But there's no evidence of an accomplice. Alan West never mentioned anyone helping from outside the prison. The FBI investigated the families and known associates of all 3 men. They found nothing to suggest outside help. It's possible someone helped them without leaving any evidence, but that's speculation, not fact. The scientific consensus is this: survival was possible but difficult. If everything went right, if the raft held together, if they paddled in the right direction, if they reached shore before hypothermia became fatal, if they found help or shelter quickly, then yes, they could have survived. But a lot of things had to go right. And most experts believe at least some of those things went wrong, leading to the men's deaths. Chapter 7. The Prison That Closed. Let's talk about what happened to Alcatraz itself. On March 21, 1963, less than a year after Morris and the Anglins escaped, the federal government closed Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. All the remaining prisoners got transferred to other federal prisons. The island was abandoned. Why did they close it? The official reason was money. Alcatraz was expensive to operate. Everything had to be shipped to the island: food, water, supplies, fuel. The prison needed constant maintenance because the salt air from the ocean corroded everything. The buildings were old, the pipes were corroding. The whole facility needed major repairs. The Department of Justice calculated it cost about $10 per day to house one prisoner at Alcatraz, compared to only $3 per day at other federal prisons. In an era when the federal government was trying to cut costs, Alcatraz didn't make financial sense anymore. Plus, by 1963, the whole philosophy of American prisons was starting to change. The harsh, punitive approach wasn't seen as effective anymore. Rehabilitation was becoming the new focus. Alcatraz represented the old way of thinking. It was time to close it. but some people believe the Morris Anglin escape contributed to the decision. If prisoners could escape from America's most secure prison, what was the point of keeping it open? The escape had embarrassed the federal prison system. It had shown that Alcatraz wasn't actually escape-proof. Keeping the prison open after such a high-profile escape would have been a constant reminder of that failure. We don't know if the escape directly caused the closure. The government never officially said that. But the timing is interesting. Less than a year after the escape, Alcatraz closed forever. Several years, the island sat empty. The buildings deteriorated. Seabirds moved in. The place became a ghost town. Then, in 1969, a group of Native American activists occupied the island. They claimed the island belonged to Native Americans under an old treaty. The occupation lasted 19 months before federal authorities removed the activists. This might sound off track, but gives you a sense of how the island remained relevant and contested even after the prison shut down. Finally, in 1972, Alcatraz Island became part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. The National Park Service took over. They started giving tours. Tourists could visit the island, see the cells, walk through the corridors, learn about the history. Today, Alcatraz is one of the most popular tourist destinations in San Francisco. More than 1 million people visit the island every year. The cell block looks much like it did in 1962. You can walk down the same corridors the prisoners walked. You can see the cells where Morris and the Anglins lived. You can see the holes in the walls where they removed their ventilation grates. You can see the utility corridor where they built their raft. The National Park Service has preserved it all as a historical site. They've even put dummy heads on the pillows in the cells to show visitors what the fake heads looked like. There's something haunting about visiting Alcatraz today. You stand in those tiny cells and you try to imagine what it was like. Living in a space 9 feet by 5 feet. Day after day, month after month, year after year. The cells are cold, the concrete walls are gray. The metal bars are solid. Standing there, you understand why men wanted to escape. You understand why they'd risk drowning in freezing water rather than stay in that place. And when you stand on the shore of Alcatraz Island and look across the water at San Francisco, you understand something else. The city looks close. It looks reachable. You can see the buildings. You can see cars driving on the streets. You can see people going about their normal lives. Freedom is right there, just 1.25 miles away. But that water, that cold, dark water with its vicious currents, that water is a barrier just as strong as any prison wall. 3 men decided that barrier could be crossed. They spent 6 months planning. They built a raft. They made fake heads. They drilled through concrete walls. They climbed pipes in the darkness. They went over fences. And they entered that water. Whether they made it across or died trying, we still don't know. But they tried. They refused to accept that escape was impossible. They used intelligence and determination and patience to give themselves a chance. And on the night of June 11th, 1962, they disappeared into the darkness. Chapter 8. The Legacy and Unanswered Questions. The escape from Alcatraz has become one of America's most famous unsolved mysteries. It's been the subject of books, documentaries, movies, and countless investigations. The 1979 movie Escape from Alcatraz, starring Clint Eastwood, brought the story to millions of people. That movie, by the way, is pretty accurate as far as Hollywood movies go. It sticks close to the known facts. If you're fascinated by these kinds of historical mysteries and want to support this channel as we dive deeper into more stories like this, hitting subscribe really makes a difference. Your support helps us keep uncovering these incredible pieces of American history. Why does this story fascinate people so much? Why do people still talk about it more than 60 years later? Part of it is the mystery. Humans love unsolved mysteries. We want to know what happened. Did they survive or die? Where are the bodies? If they survived, where did they go? These questions keep us wondering. They keep us interested. But there's something deeper, too. The escape from Alcatraz represents something about the human spirit. It's about people refusing to accept their circumstances. It's about using intelligence and creativity to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. Morris and the Anglins were criminals, yes. They'd broken the law. They'd robbed banks. They deserved to be punished. But there's still something admirable about what they accomplished. They looked at America's most secure prison and said, "We can get out of here." And maybe they actually did it. The story also raises questions about justice and punishment. Should prisons be designed to break people's spirits? Should they be places of pure punishment? Or should they focus on rehabilitation? Alcatraz represented the pure punishment approach. It was designed to be as harsh as legally allowed. Prisoners had no rights except the bare minimum. But did that approach work? Well, the prison closed after less than 30 years. The philosophy behind it fell out of favor. Today, most criminologists agree that rehabilitation is more effective than pure punishment at reducing future crime. There's also the technical aspect of the escape that fascinates people. How did they do it? How did they make tools from spoons and saw blades? How did they drill through concrete without power tools? How did they build a working raft from stolen raincoats? The ingenuity involved is remarkable. It's like a real-life version of a heist movie. People love that. Every few years, new evidence surfaces, and the story gets attention again. In 2018, new research suggested the men might have survived. In 2013, that mysterious letter arrived. In 2015, the photograph from Brazil became public. Each time something new appears, journalists investigate. Documentaries get made, and people discuss the case all over again. The U.S. Marshals Service takes the case seriously. They've said that if the three men are still alive, they'd be in their 90s now. John Anglin would be 94. Clarence would be 93. Frank Morris would be 98. At those ages, they probably aren't hiding anymore. If they survived all these years, they likely settled somewhere under assumed names and lived quiet lives. Some investigators believe the men are alive. Art Roderick, the former U.S. Marshal who worked on the case, believes there's a good chance they survived. He points to the lack of bodies, the Christmas cards, the photograph from Brazil, and the computer models showing survival was possible. He thinks they made it to shore, got help somehow, and disappeared. Other investigators believe the men died. They point to the cold water, the strong currents, the lack of any credible sightings, and the lack of any concrete evidence of survival. They think the Christmas cards were sent by family members who couldn't accept that John and Clarence were dead. They think the photograph from Brazil shows other people, not the Anglin brothers. They think the letter from 2013 was a hoax. The truth is, we just don't know. We may never know, unless someone comes forward with definitive proof, like a body, or a confession, or DNA evidence. The mystery will remain unsolved. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. What we do know is this. On June 11, 1962, 3 men accomplished something extraordinary. They escaped from a prison that everyone said couldn't be escaped from. They outsmarted one of the most secure prison systems in American history. They used nothing but their brains, some stolen materials, and 6 months of careful planning. Whether they lived or died after entering that water, they still did something that 36 men before them had failed to do. They got off Alcatraz Island alive.